iPhone 13 on us for every customer. Current, new, everyone. To show the love.
How about sushi?
I just had sushi for lunch yesterday.
How about tacos?
Automatic emergency braking, one of 6 advanced safety features standard on every 2022 Chevy Equinox. Find new technology. Find new roads. Chevrolet.
Hey everybody, and welcome to A Balanced Life with Dr. Jacquie. Of course, we have no shortage of opportunity to really kind of sit back in this season and reflect on our lives. The pandemic has taught us a couple of things: what it means to be still, to be silent, and to figure out our own path in life. I know we all have a lot going on, and so many of us are trying to discover where do we make and how do we make our next move. We're going to continue our conversation today on male mentoring and what does that look like in the grand scheme of things, whether we've been estranged from our father figure, whether we have issues or forgiveness. And, I have to be honest and say that daddy issues aren't just for daughters. And so today we want to dive right in with our guests, Dr. Tierney, Charlotte Avery, Corey Briscoe, and Pastor J.T. Johnson. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Dr. Jacquie.
Hello. Guys, when I think about the topic that we were talking about on last week, and we were getting into this space of male mentoring, what it is, what it isn't, what it looks like, what it can be, we raised some really tough issues, some critical questions that people need to ask themselves as it relates to how do we navigate that first relationship. Now, for boys, usually it's go ask your mother, you got to pray in grandmother, but we have a tendency to kind of leave dads out of the picture. And I think as women, we have to be careful not to set that tone that dad is not supposed to be present. I would love to hear your feedback related to that. How do we set the tone that men are an integral part of a male's life? Pastor Johnson.
Right. Well, good morning, Dr. J. I'll take that from Corey. That's a very, very interesting question. I think one of the things that we have to do is, before we can allow the man to be a father figure in the life of his children, I believe that there has to be a level setting of, if the man is respected and seen as the husband or the man of the house. I believe that relationship builds upon the bridge that takes us to the parental relationship. I will say from experience, growing up in a home with both my parents, my mother and my father, my mother, amazing educator, double master, taught in public school for 40 years, went into administration. But my dad, he worked with his hands. He drove a forklift. So the dynamic in the home. Mom made more money, but I never understood that. I never knew that until I got older, because dad was allowed to be the man of the house. And I believe that the respect that we gave him as being his children came from how he was treated and how we saw our mother interact with him in the home. So I believe that is an amazing starting point. If there is any type of contention, if that relationship is not established and built, I am Pastor J, so I will say that we have typically veered away from what I believe is the blueprint of relationships. The Bible tells us in Ephesians that God is the head of the church. Then Jesus submits to God. The man submitted to Jesus, and then the wife submits to the husband. And I know that word submission is kind of taboo in 2022, but I look at the word submission truly in 2022 as just respect. And if I can respect him enough to trust him to be the man in my life as a wife, I definitely can trust him to be the father of our children.
Thank you for sharing that information, because all of those relationships are quite critical. They are sort of like the linchpins that hold a household together. I want to move to Corey Briscoe and hear his perspective as well. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Dr. J. One, I agree wholeheartedly with what Pastor said. And I think, coming from a different lens, my parents divorced when I was, by fourth grade, I was in a separated household. And so I had mom and then I had dad. And I would say, I really got closer to my father, in the high school and college time. Not that we didn't have a connection, but, I tell people all the time, when you look at parenting and when you look at the impacts of divorce and separation, specifically because I ended up with my mom full time and spent time with my dad, but I was really under her leadership at the time. I had to go back and learn and understand the importance of the father figure and that male leadership and how that shaped me. And it's shaping me today as I lead a company, as I tutor other males, and understanding pivotal places in my matriculation and my rearing, that I realized that, where my mother tried academically, educationally, and all of these other places, there were places that she could not bring me. There were things that she could not teach me. And so fundamentally, I think even when we look at mentoring, when we look at the position our males are in, we've got to look at the places of how they're reared on a day-to-day. And the truth is that in many Black households, there are mother raising Black boys like me, and the impact that has on us and how we see other male relationships. I was blessed that I was able to and have a great relationship with my dad. But I would argue that, it was me. It was me and my dad forging that relationship, making sure that we understood its importance in me growing to be the best me. And I think sometimes in divided households and situations that have caused pain between one another, we, in an effort to protect ourselves, whether as spouse or significant other, we tend to forget the impact that those relationships or the lack thereof have on the Black male. And so my perspective is that we've got to go back to that, understanding that basic fundamental right, that at the end of the day, a mother can raise a Black male the best she can, and she could do a doggone good job. But there is still something that a Black male, seeing a Black male, giving to another Black male does that a woman just can't do.
I totally agree with that. Now, I grew up in a house where I didn't have any brothers. And so it was me, my two sisters, my mother, and my father. And I have to say, in full transparency, I was adopted, by my mother's husband. And that's a whole nother story for another day. But with that, I have to say there comes this level of respect and honesty from men being able to stand in the gap and identify and recognize how they can be of value in the home. Charlotte Avery, what say ye?
So, as you all know, I have 4 daughters and I have 3 sons. And, I think that when it comes to fathering and things like that, I believe it really starts from birth. And the reason why I said that is because, like Corey, I was raised by a single mother. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. But one thing that I knew when I found out that I was going to be a mom, and when I found out that my firstborn was going to be a boy, I was very careful not to do like moms do. My son wasn't my firstborn, but I was very careful not to be so over nurturing. It is my job to nurture him. It is my job to nurture all of my children. But I knew the importance of my husband being able to be a father. And sometimes, especially in the early years when babies are born, it's like, the baby is really attached to the mom. Well, I didn't do that. Like, even though, I was nursing and doing all these things, I made sure, and I was very intentional about my husband being very present, even in the infant years with our children, with my sons especially too, because you have to, my mother-in-law used to say, start out how you're going to hold out. And my thing is, I didn't want my children to always be attached to me. I didn't want them always be coming to me, and I have a blanket that says, go ask your dad, because the thing is that men have to understand that, yes, as women, we birth children, but these babies aren't going to break, right? And so it's important for, even in the early years, in infancy years and toddler years, for women to pass the children off to the husband so that he can hold them, so that he can speak into them, so that they can spend time together. And those are very pivotal times, because one thing that I have found, even just as I'm coaching families and other women, is that if men don't feel that they can step to the plate early, then they are going to take a step back and coming to the plate later. And so I really made it a point to let my husband know, hey, yes, we have these children together, and yes, I birthed them, but you're an active participant. And he is, and I love my husband for that. He is a very active participant in the lives of our children. But I do think that it starts early, even in single parent households, because there are going to be some people who watch this who, they might not be married. They may be in a co-parenting situation. But at the point that your child is born, at the point that you have a son, it is a mother's responsibility, especially if the father is very equipped, to make sure that son is spending time with the father, even in the infancy, toddler, adolescent, teenage, young adult years.
All those stages of growth and development require us to take a really deep look at how do we plan, engage, and prepare our young boys to be able to receive men. Because as it's already been stated, there are going to be times that you do not have someone to look up to. There's no one that's in your immediate circle. Dr. Tierney, when you are engaging, and even in your own life, what does this male mentoring look like for you, but this specific father relationship that both boys and girls have?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to speak to this from the vantage point of the abandoned daughter. So my mother and my father were never married. She was young, when she had me. And so my grandparents stepped in to be the village to help raise me. And so I was raised, I guess you could say, in a 2-parent home, because it was my grandmother and my grandfather and my mother. We were, all together. And so I had my grandfather there as kind of the father, my initial father figure. And my mother and my grandmother, would just kind of let me and my grandfather do our thing. There were certain things, certain special things that only my grandfather and I had, from everything to him teaching me how to change a tire, to the little quirky things that we would do, around the house. And it was pivotal in helping me to not develop such strong daddy issues. I mean, I still had daddy issues because my father, he was not around. I knew who he was, and I knew that he was addicted, to drugs at the time. And even though we would spend some time, together, it wasn't as pivotal as my relationship with my grandfather. And so it was really, really important for me to have that male presence, because when thinking about, as I was developing into a young girl and then into a woman, having my grandfather there to kind of teach me, along with the things that my mother and my grandmother were teaching me about being a lady. And I think I said this last week about putting me up on game on some of the little tricks, that the little boys would play, and, telling me that I was beautiful all the time. So it didn't faze me, when the guys would tell me that I was beautiful. It was pivotal to me growing up, having him there. I couldn't imagine what it would have been not having that male presence in my life. So that's one of the things that I definitely, when I'm speaking with clients, or, particularly clients who may have young boys and for various reasons, maybe trying to keep the father out of the child's life, I always, advocate for there to be some, but barring any abuse or anything like that, for there to be some type of reconciliation, because that child needs that father just like I needed my grandfather.
Wow, such words of wisdom. When we come back after the break, I want to pick up on something. I hope that you heard it. Abandonment and estrangement. These are two keys that literally can tear a family apart, and also keep boys from being able to build solid foundations and relationships with their mothers and also with their father. When we come back after the break, we're going to take a deeper dive.
How about sushi?
I just had sushi for lunch yesterday.
How about tacos?
Automatic emergency braking, one of 6 advanced safety features standard on every 2022 Chevy Equinox. Find new technology. Find new roads. Chevrolet.
It's time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way. Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on that.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
You dig?
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. Excuse me. Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. We're learning so much today about what it means to be able to continue mentoring our young boys and our men and helping our older men establish ways to have communication. And oftentimes, forgiveness is a big part of not being able to move forward because of 2 words, abandonment and estrangement. I want to invite all of our guests back in because I think that this is one of those conversations that the family needs to have together. You know, sometimes, guys, when we are going through all of these stages and trying to figure out what it looks like to bring someone back into the home, you know, I mentioned earlier in the previous segment that, you know, I was adopted by my mother's husband when I was 2, maybe it might have been a little bit older than that, because I remember seeing myself in the wedding pictures. And so it's just one of those things where as you get older, you start asking questions. There was so much, you know, growing up that I did not know, but the relationship that I had with the person who gave me my last name, that family, the Hood family, was outstanding and amazing. And there were so many boy cousins and male uncles and, you know, relatives that gave me an opportunity to see what real authentic manhood looked like. And I really wasn't until my 20s, literally, I was in my 20s when I found out that my dad was not my biological father, but I found out after my biological father had died. And I know that there are a lot of people that are out there that are in that space who have some unresolved issues. So sometimes estrangement and abandonment literally can never be reconciled. And so for those of you who are watching in that space, I hope that something that we say today will help you know that you have that capacity to still be great, to still be amazing, to still find your space if you have a willingness in your heart to do that. I want to start this conversation with Corey because he mentioned something that most people don't like to talk about, and that's divorce and how it impacts young boys. And Corey, in that time that you were growing up, how did you, I'm going to go with this question. At what age were you able to navigate being a child, a male child of divorce, and seeing your father in a light that made it comfortable for you to continue that relationship?
It's a great question, Dr. J. And I think for me, you know, my honest truth is that, you know, through elementary school, you know, you kind of just were going through the flow. I think it's middle school and high school when you really, you know, for me, it started to hit me that the presence. My dad would make sure he was present at every major milestone, but not having that day-to-day interaction, I think, was something that was difficult for me. And for me, I think, honestly, it was when I was able to go off on my own. You know, when I went to college, I was very intentional about spending time with my dad, being closer to my dad, getting words and counsel from my dad. And I think you'll find in most divorce relationships that that is the case. And I think it's the reality of, two hurt people, right? And sometimes in that hurt, there can be a selfishness that affects the children. And I just think that's the case. And it's taboo in the Black families to talk about that, but that is the reality. And so for me, that independence was able to create a space where I could ask questions and I could seek help. And I honestly think the relationship that we have developed and have formed and bonded actually helped us to be a cohesive family, even in divorce, that there is a relationship that is good and solid, even in divorce. And I think some of that is because of myself and my sister being able to forge that. And so in my perspective, I find that a lot of times that it takes that level of independent autonomy where I now have the right and the authority to seek out and make decisions for myself.
I want to ask you a follow-up question, because there's some times when there's punishment that happens where we find moms keep kids, especially their male sons, from their father. But then too, when that kid looks like their dad, there is levels of abuse and other layers of, literally it's like pulling back the skin of an onion. How do we help our audience and our community be able to deal with that continuous hurting people hurt people? Where do we stop all that?
It starts with that moment that you realize that the kid is bigger than you. I think so often when we look at our children, children had no say in the matter. They had no say in the matter. And so often, because of our own feelings, emotions, hurt, and pain, we use them as tools to get at people. We use them as tools to withhold them. And what we aren't realizing is that though we think we're dealing with our own pieces of internal struggle, what we are causing is a domino effect now on the children. And plain and simple, you gotta stop. I think it's been taboo for so long to talk about divorce and these family dynamics in our communities. But the reality is we've grown as a society, and we now understand the implications mentally and spiritually and socially, and we just have to do better. And so my advice to parents that are divorced is that you have to take your divorce situation and deal with it on your own. You've got to deal with that situation in its own lens, in its own context. The children are a byproduct of two. And they will always be, no matter, even if you detest, hate, dislike the other, they will always be a byproduct of two. And so I say often that you have to allow yourself to be bigger for your child and make decisions that are not in your interest, but in their interest.
Now, that's some wisdom right there. I want to ask Pastor JT this question, because when we talk about being able to have forgiveness, oftentimes we don't know what it is we're trying to forgive. We may be upset that the dad wasn't in the home, but we don't understand why they weren't there. There may be these opportunities that abandonment is because that individual is a workaholic and they're consistently absent. How do we help our boys, Pastor JT, navigate and understand family dynamics so that they can continue to have a relationship with their father or father figure?
And Dr. Jacquie, I love the word that you said, relationship. I threw out a phrase last week that has since been used a couple of times since, and it's being intentionally relational. There has to be some intentionality around the relationship, be it if the child is adolescent, they're teenage, or if we are men attempting to reconcile or repair a relationship that wasn't there. And I love the way that you posed the question, because there are some children who grow up in a home where both parents are there, but you use the phrase workaholic, where it feels like they're growing up in a single parent home. And so that could cause resentment. that could cause a thought that, he was never there. He was in the house, but he was never in my life. And I believe that there has to be some true honesty, some self-awareness. What are you looking for? And then be willing to have open dialogue, and then come into the relationship or come into the conversation with your hands out instead of your hands up. And so many times when we come in and we are attempting to get questions answered, and we are coming in and we are trying to repair, oftentimes how we come in dictates how the conversation will end. And a lot of people come in pain. A lot of people come in hurt. So they're not speaking from a factual place. They're speaking from an emotional place. And so if the conversation is ever going to be had, I believe that there has to be some type of vulnerability, as well as a true mind or a true space that's given that allows there to be some honest dialogue. Because many of us, and I say this in several settings, especially as we deal with mental health, especially as we deal with trauma, especially trauma in the African American community, we have so much, I believe, in our head that we feel that we have progressed. But many of us don't take into account that we are really like one generation away from Jim Crow, one generation away from slavery, one generation away from where men really didn't have true relational relationships with their children because they didn't have the time. They were on plantations. They were working sun up to sundown. And that wasn't really something that they saw modeled by their parents. And many of us, we are the byproducts of what our parents saw. So I think that that's the first thing, Dr. Jacquie, if I can just say that. I think many of us have to come in willing to forgive our parents for what they didn't even know that they were doing wrong. Because now in hindsight, we have probably a level of expectation. We've watched The Cosby Show. We've watched how well Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv handled Will when he had to move into Bel Air. And it shaped our mind to believe that that's what we should have experienced when we grew up in the house with a James from Good Times. And so we really don't give that person that was in our lives the grace that we are looking for. So if we are willing or we want to be forgiven for some of the things that we did as children that may have caused some sleepless nights for our parents, that may have caused some headaches unnecessarily for them, I believe that we also have to have that type of grace and forgiveness for our parents as well. You said something else, and I'm going to go on and finish, but you said another word, reconciliation. Forgiveness is something that we have to do and continue to do in the African American community. There was a story in the Bible where Jesus was talking to his disciples, and Peter, of all people, asked a question, say, should I forgive my brother 7 times? And Jesus said, hardly no, 70 times 7. And so I call that the 490 rule. That doesn't mean that I forgive you 490 times of an offense, 490 offensive times. That means every time that thought crosses through my mind, I forgive you. I'm not holding you in contempt to who you were, and you apologize and you were remorseful. I believe that we attempt to go into conversations and relationships looking for reconciliation, but reconciliation involves 2 people. But we still have to forgive, because without forgiveness, we can't have that one big thing that we need to continue to move forward, and that's restoration. 2 people are required for reconciliation, but 1 person needs to forgive to make sure that they are restored.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think as we continue this conversation, this dialogue, and I'm, at that space where I'm going to go to a break because the thought that I have in my head is to talk about how projecting plays a part in the development of our boys. When we come back after the break, I want to expand our conversation just a little bit because we're right at that space where I think some of you are identifying that there's a breakthrough, and we're going to talk about that after our break.
Love our new Alexa.
It's a Buick.
Yeah, Alexa.
Buick.
Alexa.
It's a Buick.
It's an Alexa. It's a Buick. It's an Alexa. Coach, that's a Buick. That's an Alexa.
The Buick Enclave with available Alexa built in.
Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Verizon just gave us all a brand new iPhone 13.
We've been customers for years. I thought new phones were for new customers. We got iPhone 13s too, switched to Verizon 2 minutes ago.
Ours were busted, and we still got a shiny new one.
Check it out. So wait, everybody gets the same great deal.
I think that's the point.
iPhone 13 on us for every customer. Current, new, everyone. On any unlimited plan, starting at just $35. All on the network more people rely on.
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And let me just tell you, this conversation and dialogue today is so stimulating, but it's also providing us some tools and tips and being a little bit revelatory, if you will, in what it means to look at our life in toto, from the time that we were born, all of the things that we've experienced, and make some determinations about where we are in our relationship with our fathers or our father figure, whether you are male or female. I think you have to identify and say, what am I doing that is causing my son, causing my nephew, causing my male cousin to be out of connection with who he is, growing toward his manhood? I want to talk for a moment about projecting, because I see it oftentimes in this space where, oh, don't do that because, the son is going to feel some type of way, or, your dad doesn't appreciate it when you do these kinds of things. We have to be careful and watch our words, because there is life and death and the power of the tongue. But at the same time, there's also relationship destroying words, and how we communicate, how we interject our thoughts and our feelings. We have to make sure they come from a place of wholeness. I want to talk to Dr. Tierney and Charlotte for just a moment before I bring the guys in, because oftentimes as women, we have a tendency to project our feelings and our emotions. And Pastor JT said something that was very intriguing to me about how we have conversations that are more emotional than rational. Charlotte and Dr. Tierney, when you think about these conversations that we have, do you feel like we're more emotional than rational, Charlotte?
I believe, from my standpoint, in my early years, being a mom, I was more emotional, but now, I'm a little older, a little wiser, have a few more gray hairs. Now I am more rational about, my thinking, about my conversation, very careful with my words. I mean, that's why I wrote the 40-day tone of voice tone down, is because, I had a silver tongue and I, was saying and doing some damaging things in my own household, not just with my husband, but with everybody in the house, and I'm not proud of it, but, I own that, and so I know there's a penalty, that goes along with that. But, when you're talking about projection, I remember when I got married, and, and of course, I knew what kind of man my father was. And so, there were certain things that I went into marriage saying, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm never going to be married to somebody who does X, Y, and Z. And, and so like early on in my marriage, when I saw some things in my husband that reminded me of my dad, like I would just get so angry and so defensive sometimes, not because I didn't love my husband, but because I didn't want to be married to my father. And then when I had sons, and I saw like certain behaviors and things like that. And I was like, oh man, I got to really snatch that behavior out of him, because that behavior reminds me of my dad. And, you know, even though he was a little person, I didn't want him to grow up to be a big person like my dad, in the way my dad was, you know, some of my dad's behavior. And so I found myself sometimes making, you know, choices that were not rational, but totally based off of emotion from the things that I had experienced. And that's never a good thing. But that's also why it's important, you know, that as we're on this journey, that, you know, healing is not only a choice, but healing is a journey. It is a process. And it's something that we're going to do over and over and over again, whether, you know, even when it comes to our daddy issues.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Tierney.
So I want to address this through the emotional lens of forgiveness, and kind of picking up where Pastor JT left off. There's a quote that says, life without forgiveness is governed by a cycle of resentment and retaliation. And so when we are walking in that unforgiveness, pretty much everything that governs our life will be resentment or retaliation based on what injury we incurred. Now, I'm going to be really transparent here. Forgiveness is pivotal. When you're thinking about leveling up, it is pivotal in you getting to your next level. It's so important. I dedicated an entire chapter in my book just to forgiveness. And the reason why I really had to do that is because God had to sit me down. You know, forgiveness is something that I struggled with, like, seriously. Like, I did not believe that I would ever be able to forgive my dad. For me, forgiveness meant that I was making it okay in what he did, you know, so I had to hold on to the anger. I had to hold on to the bitterness. I had to hold on to the resentment in order to, like, pay him back, when really what I was trying to get was some type of restitution. And that's often what we do when we find ourselves in that emotional state of unforgiveness. We're trying to get restitution for what happened to us. That could be an apology, or it could be we want the person to suffer and hurt as much as they hurt us and what we felt, you know. But what we fail to realize is that the only person we're hurting is ourselves. You know, that's the only person that we're hurting, because we're the ones sitting here holding on to the anger and the resentment of what they did. Think about it this way. When we don't forgive them, we're constantly allowing ourselves to be hurt over and over and over again, because we are replaying over and over and over again in our thoughts and in our emotions what they did to us. And so when we are caught in that cycle, we will never really be able to get truly to our next level in our lives. I tell the full story in my book, in this particular chapter, of the relationship with my father, why that forgiveness piece was such a struggle to me, why there were times where I just downright hated, you know, my father and resented him, you know, and I know that's a strong word, but that's how I felt, you know, and he knows it. We have since reconciled, and he gave me, you know, baby, tell your story, because I did it. I didn't know any better. You know, he had some hurts of his own that he was using drugs to try to cope with it, not really realizing how he was hurting me and my siblings. And so growing up with that hurt, it colored how I viewed and approached men. You know, I became that hurt person that was hurting people. You know, I began to think that men were supposed to be like tissues, soft, strong, and disposable. You know, because if the man who made me did not care enough to stick around, to hold my hand, to be there for me, then why would Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, or Mike? You know, and so that was the way that I approached men in relationships. And so if I had kept walking in that emotion of that unforgiveness, I would not be married right now. And I say that totally honestly. My unforgiveness was blocking me from experiencing the fullness of love and relationship that God had for me in that union of marriage. So that's why I plant my flag on that forgiveness piece every time, because when we have that unforgiveness, we are blocking ourselves, and not just in the relational sense. You know, it could be in career, it can be in your finances, it can be in your spiritual, in every aspect of our lives where there is a root of unforgiveness. I can guarantee what you are doing is blocking your next level of success.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Ladies, so you've given us a lot of food for thought. I want to ask the guys to come in as we go to this next section, because, you know, we're leaning into that communication aspects of relationships. And we're talking a lot about abuse and abandonment, and whether it's from being a workaholic, having drug addiction, being incarcerated, or going in the military, all of these things and how we project our feelings and emotions can literally leave people wanting. And out of that become daddy issues. Now, daddy issues are not just for daughters. I think that we're very clear on that, because in community, we've often celebrated, things like Papa was a Rolling Stone. We've celebrated dad being missing, and we said that it was okay to have more than one family. And the reality is, in our community, we don't want that to end. We would really like for dads to stick around, stay around, to be there, to go to teach your sons. We have all these daddy-daughter dances, but when do we dress our boys up, put them in ties, and, take them out on a date to show them how to really be men? Corey, you're a Southern boy. And so, with this in mind, what are some of the things that you believe our boys need to be taught as far as chivalry's not dead? At least we're raising our girls to, men should open the door for you and pull out a chair. Tell us about what this new manhood should look like as we're raising our Black boys.
I love what Dr. Tierney started with the whole tissue analogy, and I'm going to take that and deconstruct that just a little bit. I think one of the challenges with modern society, and I think one thing that my dad got right, was that you can be a strong Black male and be compassionate and have emotions and be in tune with your emotions. And you can use those emotions to fuel and make you better and to make society around you better. And so when I think of what we have to do, again, to create an ecosystem and a society where the Black male is present, we have to restore common values of decency and chivalry and hope and love and compassion. I think that we have become so we've come to the point as a society where we feel it has to be bifurcated. You're either strong, right, and have no emotions, or you're either weak and you're fully in touch with all your emotions. And I'm here to say very clearly that you can have both. You can have strength and be in touch with emotions that help you with compassion and making you a good person. And so I think that when I look at what we need as a society, specifically and a village around African American males, it's this example of what it looks like and how what it looks like to, one, be able to be in tune with the two of those, and two, that it doesn't make you less of who you are, but that these fundamental things still command respect, still have value and worth, and don't discredit who you are as a person, as a male.
Thank you for sharing that. Pastor JT, what say ye about how do we level the playing field for our young boys while at the same time building a new generation of young boys toward manhood?
Wow. I honestly believe, and I believe that Corey summed it up. I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to allow our young men to be young men. I believe that oftentimes in homes, in single parent homes, if I can go that route, the mother now forges a relationship with the son that sometimes is unhealthy, because now the son is perceived to be the man of the house. He has this emotional capital that he's not necessarily her son, but he can go on her Facebook page and see his picture as being her MCM on Monday, her Man Crush Monday. I believe that we have to continue to keep the relational lines as they are. You're my son. You're not holding the space of being my man until another man comes. So then what happens is if there happens to be another man that you get into a relationship with, and this man comes in and he really wants to provide that fatherhood figure, that strong, embracing father figure that you may have prayed for, if you have invested into your son that he is your king, he won't know how to be a prince. That was dope. But I think that's one of the things that we really have to champion, is that our young men now, in some instances, are being catered to in such an unhealthy way that when they get of age, they don't even know how to be a father because they are so used to being served. And I think what has happened is that our young girls, they are catching the dirty side of the storm. So our young girls are being raised now, and they're being so hard and they're being so calloused. And now you look at our young men, and they are being more tender. And so now it's causing to be a very confused dynamic that if it's not addressed in the home, if this couple ever comes together and they are married, then the wife won't necessarily know how to be a wife because she has been trained throughout these years that you don't need a man for this, or I can do for myself. And so then now you have a young man that comes into the home, and he's not a man, he's just a male, and he does not really know how to be a true leader. He doesn't know how to cover his home. He doesn't know how to be a protector because he is so used to have everything handed to him. It just, burns me up if I drive to a gas station and I see a young boy sitting in the car while his mother is outside pumping the gas. No, we're teaching right there at that moment. And then the last thing that I would say, I believe, and I can just say this, if we have any men that are watching, there needs to be, I believe, men stepping up and just being great men in the community, being great men at your church, being great men in your schools, because that father figure may not necessarily be in the home, but you can be an amazing father figure when that young man sees you. And when that young man sees you, you could be the picture that he will live up to be. You could be that mentor. And so oftentimes we're looking for the next Dr. King. We're looking for the next Malcolm. We're looking for the next big name. But there are people who are in our communities that are just as influential, that may never have a national platform, that may never get 1,000 likes on an Instagram post. But if you can take a young man and do this before you do this, I promise you, you will have an impact on his life that will be generational.
Outstanding words. I mean, literally, you just described the cyclical nature of daddy issues, because it really does trickle down. I've watched women say, don't talk to my son. You don't tell him how to pump gas. You don't need to show him how to count money. And that sends two messages, if you will. One, you will never be in a space of being able to be mentored because someone has blocked your ability to receive leadership in its truest. But then the other side of that, you also told that boy that only my mama can chastise me. Only my mama can tell me what to do. We're not going to get into this entire issue of being mama's boys. That's a whole nother show within itself. And we really do run the gamut of not allowing our young boys to fall into this place of having authentic manhood show up in front of them and allow them to ask men questions, to challenge, what mama says. Ladies, I hear you. That's your son, and I get it. But sometimes young boys need to be able to establish for themselves their own baseline for the world. They need to have their own worldview. They need to know how to think for themselves. How can we send them out into the world to be the men that we need them to be if they never challenge even us, so that we can see that we taught them well, that they know how to think for themselves? When we come back after the break, I want to have our final words from our guests, because I think that this is a great way for us to learn how to trust our village when we're back after the break.
Verizon just gave us all a brand new iPhone 13.
We've been customers for years. We got iPhone 13s too. Switched 2 minutes ago, literally right before this.
iPhone 13 on us on any unlimited plan for every customer, with plans starting at just $35. All on the network more people rely on.
Love our new Alexa.
It's a Buick.
Yeah, Alexa.
Buick.
Alexa.
It's a Buick.
It's an Alexa. It's a Buick. It's an Alexa. Coach, that's a Buick. That's an Alexa.
The Buick Enclave with available Alexa built-in.
Welcome back to A Balanced Life. And oh my God, is your mind not blown? I mean, literally, I know your feelings are hurt. You're wearing them on your sleeves. You're typing us in the chat. You're telling us all of these kinds of things like, who do you think you are telling me how to raise my son? At the end of the day, we're your village. We are the people that love you and we love your kids. We care about you and we want the best for them. We are in this space of all of us learning how to live a balanced life so that we can talk to one another and speak out for one another. I want to bring everybody back in because I think these final words that they have to share with us today will kind of draw us down to the few takeaways that we would like to share with our audience so that as they're putting their toolkit together, as they're writing down these tips to sort of move out of their own way and stop self-sabotaging as it comes to raising Black boys. Charlotte Avery, what say you about tips and takeaways?
So one of my tips is this, it is important when we're raising our boys, it is important to teach them what servant leadership is. It's not just for you to be a leader and for somebody to be serving you, but really there is strength in servanthood. And I think that's a really big lesson that we need to teach our boys that, chivalry isn't dead. In my household, my boys, they open the car door for me. They open the car doors for their sister. My son, Pastor Jay, you don't even have to worry about it because my son is standing outside pumping gas in the rain, sleet, or snow. And so, they don't get to, do not stunt the growth of your boys. Let them be the men that they have been created to be so that they do know how to serve, so that they do know how to be men, so that they will know how to, be fathers and protectors and all of these different things.
Absolutely. Dr. Tierney.
The thing I would say, for parents, for aunties, for TTs, for uncles, heal. Do your work and heal. Be that from unforgiveness, be that from any unresolved bitterness or things that might have, happened to you, heal, because like we've been saying, hurt people. And sometimes we can act out of our hurt that might be, how we said earlier of keeping a child away from, their father because of our hurt. Or it might be that we're doing something that we're acting out of our hurt that could later hurt our children, so the best thing that we can do is heal.
Thank you so much, Pastor JT.
Wow. Today's show was amazing. So much was said. And if I could leave this one thing, none of us are in our perfected state. Mm-hmm. All of us are a work in progress. But you can be a work in progress as well as be the master's piece at the same time. And when I say the master's piece, you could be the piece that the master will use to bring about healing, restoration, fulfillment, and completion in your life, in your family, as well as in the lives of others. I will leave with this. Extend grace to those that may have unknowingly not met your expectations and caused daddy issues, and be prayerful to your heavenly Father as he heals you and hopefully will heal the relationship with those that you have to extend grace to, because the last thing that we would want is not to have extended the grace and then years from now be needing the grace for ourselves.
Absolutely. Corey Briscoe.
The good pastor and I clearly were on the same page. I think I leave with the word grace. And there's an old quote that I think really talks about this segment to me. And it simply says, grace means that all of your mistakes now serve a purpose instead of a shame. And so when I think of that in itself, all the things that we've been through, all of the context of who we are add to this great story. And so often we are ashamed of it, but let's use it to build a better future, not just for us, not just for our children, but for our communities so that we can continue to thrive.
Thank you for sharing that. When we come back after the break, I'm going to give my closing reflections.
How about sushi?
I just had sushi for lunch yesterday.
How about tacos?
Automatic emergency braking, one of 6 advanced safety features standard on every 2022 Chevy Equinox. Find new technology. Find new roads. Chevrolet.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
Are the only bins that will accommodate larger rollerboards.
They put 10 in here?
10, and you don't come out till you die. And you eat him, you eat 10.
Oh my God.
Welcome back, everybody. And as we prepare to wrap up another amazing segment here on A Balanced Life, I leave you with these words. You know, in this age and stage in which we're finding ourselves, mentoring boys is not always easy. But as you can tell, there are a number of people who are out there in our space already who have the ability and the capacity to step into their lives right where they are. And I know that it's difficult. So we're not telling you to move out of your comfort zone until you're ready. We're asking you to give yourself space and grace to be able to even consider the idea that that child's father could be their mentor. I know you don't like him. You may even hate him. He may even be just no good, but that's not our role. Our role is designed for us to be able to allow you to have an opportunity to really reconsider what is keeping you out of balance in your relationship with your sons. Male, female, single parent, 2-parent family household. What we desire is to raise up this next generation of young boys who understand and value women, who understand and value themselves, who recognize and identify that in this age of advocacy, that everyone is in their corner to help them become better. It is up to us in this season in which we find ourselves to be able to allow young boys to find their bent. That is their God-given way, their talent, their ability, their purpose, their passion, and then have people come alongside them to help them grow in that. We live in some strange times, and we want our young men to be prepared and equipped on every side to be able to say that chivalry is not dead. Somebody raised me well. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, and I hope that you are blessed by something we have said and something that you have heard. Bye now. Until next time.